Have I made any modern garments? No. Have I made anything with a zipper? No. Have I made anything with princess seams? No. Do I even really know what princess seams are? No. Well, surprise, surprise, I have decided to jump on the Queen's Gambit bandwagon, and it's all because I found this fabric online for $10 a yard, and I thought it would be perfect, even though it's not, well, I think the dress is technically dark green, but it's a fun plaid that is similar, at least in size, if not color, to what's in the TV show. So I was really delaying. I've had this fabric for like, I don't know, maybe a month now. I bought it very soon after I watched the actual show, but I was really struggling to find a pattern. There are some people who've suggested like more modern patterns. I was trying to find a vintage pattern, but nothing was quite right. Nothing quite had the V-neck and the overlap in the front, but I never look at the patterns at Goodwill because they're just always like a disaster and a mess. But I stumbled across this one, and for 49 cents, I was like, okay, I'll put a circle skirt on it so it'll be cut off at the waist, but like it's got a V-neck, and the pattern like cuts off in the front, so I can adjust the V-neck to be lower and to overlap. And this is 5913 Simplicity, and I think it's not from the 60s, which is the time period for this dress. Yeah, it's 1973, so we're working with a little bit later than the 60s that it would be. But the pattern came already cut out. The person who did this didn't do the blouse in this pattern. They only made the pinafore jumper, so everything's already cut out. It's not quite my size. It's too small, but I'm gonna adjust the pattern pieces anyway. But at least this gives me something to start with, because have I made any modern garments? No. Have I made anything with a zipper? No. Have I made anything with princess seams? No. Do I even really know what princess seams are? No. But I'm gonna try this anyway. The first thing I needed to change on the pattern was to take out, there's two bust darts, I believe is what they're called in the original pattern, and instead of those I wanted to make a princess seam, so essentially that front piece is going to be cut in half. So I started by drawing like the left hand side of the pattern out, and then drawing in my princess seam, which I drew on the darts onto the pattern paper so that I could see where like the curve should be, and then I sort of just made a good guess and sort of fiddled around with that curve for the princess seam. The adjustment needed for this other piece on the front middle, is that the V-neck needs to be deepened so that it overlaps at the waist. So that's all I changed on the front center piece. The back piece needed the least changes. All I did was add a little bit to the middle because I thought the pattern was too small, and then cut it off at the waist. From this first mock-up, I could see that I needed to lengthen the back and shorten the front. I needed to take in the princess seam on the waist a bit, and then I also needed to extend the front center V's down instead of stopping them so they would meet, so that they could overlap instead. So I made those changes to the pattern. I made sure I renumbered my new pattern piece. I also ended up removing all of the excess that I added to the back pattern piece. And after mock-up number 2, I was ready to move on. This is my first real foray into pattern matching, and to start that, I am making the skirt, which involves using the circumference equation to take your waist measurement and get a radius. I think mine was 17 centimeters, and I used a tape measure to mark a perfect quarter circle around the fabric, which has been folded twice, by the way, so that you make the one cut and it ends up in a circle. The process is then repeated for the bottom of the skirt, but you don't need to mess around with any equation. You just go as far as your fabric will allow you. So you're going to be limited by the width of your fabric. Now on to the actual pattern matching. The most important thing I wanted was for there to be a black line of the plaid right down the center. So I took the mock-up, marked where the center was, taking into account seam allowance, then transferred that to my pattern piece. Then taking the pattern piece and trying to line up the mark I made on the center of the plaid. I moved the mark onto the back of the pattern piece so that I could flip it over and repeat. And it's important that this piece mirrors exactly the other piece. So it's helpful for me to have it right next to it so I can line up all the plaid to match. I found out that those first pieces were actually the easiest, and it's much harder now to make each piece of the pattern match as you go around to the back. So we're going to move on to the sides of the front, which is a curved seam. So I just matched the top up really well, and I knew that they weren't going to match perfectly down the curve, but it would be pretty close, and that's okay. Now, I knew because of the curves in my pattern that I could never get the pattern matching absolutely perfect, so I decided the sides were where we were going to fudge it a little bit. I want the back middle to also be the center of the plaid along with the black stripes, so I lined up my pattern piece there first. Then you can see that the front side piece is on a slant, so that's where it's definitely not going to match up very well. So again, I just matched up the top, and the rest is going to be okay. With all the pattern pieces cut out, it's time for assembly, starting with the front pieces getting put together. And you'll be shocked to know that I actually did some hand basting for these curved seams, because I know that that's going to help me so much on getting a smooth curved seam, which is super important because these lie right on the front of the dress. So if they're wonky, the whole dress is going to be wonky. The first step of putting the dress together is to machine stitch along that basted seam I just put in on each side. I'm trying to figure out how I wanted to do my seam allowances before I start sewing up most of the seams. So I tried a French seam first, but it's like super bulky, which is really not a surprise. Then I also pinked it, but it almost frays more being pinked than not pinked. I don't know if that's something obvious about wool, but like when it's just cut, it's pretty good. So I decided what I'm gonna do is just put little tiny zigzags on the edge of my seams, and I'll do that first on the raw edges. Now it's time for my first zipper ever. I am going to put the video that I used in the description to help me figure this out. I'm using an invisible zipper, which makes it a little more confusing to figure out how to put it in correctly. But I got a tip from my mom too late after I'd already finished it that glue stick is actually the secret, because it's hard to tell where your seam allowances are going to lie, and I kept getting confused. So you'll see here, I'm going to line it up how it's going to be finished, then I pin the zipper on, then unzip it, and then unpinned but left the zipper right on the fabric where it should be, because I kept getting so confused if the zipper needs to be face up, face down, how far away it needed to be from the edge of the fabric, and that helped me sort of figure it out. For actually putting the zipper in, I'm using a zipper foot and adjusting the needle all the way to the right side to get the stitch as close as I can to the edge of that zipper. The place I had some difficulties was down at the bottom. The actual zipper like pushed my foot to the side and made it a little wonky, so this is me going in and trying to get that stitch closer to the edge of the zipper, even though the metal piece is right there pushing the foot away. At this point, I'd almost forgotten about the back darts, which would have been bad, so I just drew them on, pinned them up, sewed them up. It was pretty simple. With the garment fully assembled, the next step is facings, and because I messed with the pattern pieces a bit, I needed to change the facings, especially for the front center. So I just took the pattern piece that I made for the front center and folded it into just a long strip. It's basically just a long rectangle. And once you have the neck piece cut out and the two fronts that go down the front edges, I sewed those together into one continuous strip. Then sew that continuous strip along the front edges all the way around. So I have the facing sewed on. I turned it to pin sew like top stitching, but it is so thick. Like, oh my god. What is that, like 8 layers? I don't think a 1/4 inch of fabric is going to go through my sewing machine. So, and that happens in 4 places because there's the darts. I might just try, and then I'm assuming when I hit one of those spots, I'm just gonna, and then I'll have to figure out what to do from there. Seems to be working, but I do not have hopes. Imminent disaster is approaching. Oh my god, look how thick that is! Oh no. Oh no. I just bent my needle. Can you see that? Oh no. Oh no. Oh no. Oh god. Do I just bend it back? Oh shit. I think not. Because I am stupid, I am just going to try again. I put on the thickest needle I've got. I'm just going to be very careful. Maybe I'll just do it by hand. I'm afraid. Oh God. Another one. I don't know why the armhole facings are supposed to be cut as two separate pieces, but to avoid future mountains, I am cutting it as one. That way there'll just be one mountain at the top of each sleeve instead of also at the bottom. When attaching the first side of these arm facings, you can see the moment I realized I forgot the existence of a zipper here coming up. Oh, shoot. I thought I had screwed myself and like I needed more seam allowance, and I was also considering like, can I just sew over it? And then I was like, no, that means the zipper won't work. But then in actuality, all I need to do is just cut it there and finish off the edges with my little zigzag, which isn't that much of a pain. And that the facings line up exactly where they need to be on the edges of the zipper. So no problem at all. And by some miracle, the bodice actually fit really good. The only issue is that like up on the top of the shoulders, there's so much fabric with facings and all the seams that I knew I needed to trim that down because it was like I had shoulder pads on. Now on that mock-up try-on, you could definitely see that the edges of all these front pieces do not line up super straight, but I didn't want to cut them because I'd already finished the edges around on everything, and it wouldn't do any harm to just leave them a little wonky on the inside. So to make sure that the skirt was attached straight, I ended up just drawing on the stitch line all the way around. So it needed to be a little higher in the back, a little lower in the front, and that will help when stitching. There we go. The most important part of attaching this skirt is that there are 4 places on the skirt where the plaid goes straight down the skirt. So I need to make sure 2 of those line up with the front center line and the back center line. I didn't take any footage of this, but it was just a super simple stitch all the way around. It's kind of a look with the facings out. What do you think? Kind of prairie chic. Alas. It's much more flattering if I sort of line up where the lines are supposed to be. Just like that. I could sew it, but I think I might have trouble getting it on and off if I do that. So I might add some hooks and eyes maybe. Just a little bit of footage of me admiring my pattern matching on the front and the back. You gotta celebrate the wins when you get them. There's a little unevenness right there, but I could easily rip that out and just make that straight. But other than that, I think the skirt attachment is good. What I'm wondering now, I'm just trying to make sure like putting my hands on my hips, and it's right on that seam, so that's pretty good. It's just not a very flattering dress. I think I needed to trim down this more, maybe it better. It's making me feel very, very wide. But I'm wondering, a belt fixes everything, right? If I make a matching belt, that feels very 60s, right? For the hem, I've got some, I think this is cotton tape, and the plan is to sew it along the front, and then I'll just turn it over and sew along the edge, so it'll be top stitched on the front. Here's the finished hem. In hindsight, I should have used like black tape, but it's what I had. I didn't want to go to the store again. And here's the arm facing after being snipped and stitched down. And you can't see the stitches on the front because this wool is so thick. And I did end up making a belt that is on the bias, and I just used a simple clasp from Joann's, the only acceptable one they had. And it's time for a reveal. This was a super fun project for me, and even though it's a little bit different than what's in the TV show, color and length and fabric type, and I'm definitely a different body type than her, but you know what, it's cute, and it was so fun doing a modern garment that came together in like 2 days because it's all just machine stitching for the most part. I would highly recommend, and I think maybe I'll sew more vintage in the future. So thanks so much for watching. This was so fun, and stay tuned for what I've got coming next.